Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we have with us Esther Choy, who is the founder and president of Leadership Story Lab and the author of the newly released book, Let the Stories Do the Work. Welcome to the program, Esther.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, you're welcome. Give us a little bit of background on your entrepreneurial journey or your story, and tell us about your Leadership Story Lab and what you focus on with clients.
Sure, happy to. Well, my journey started with the mindset that I will never go on this journey. I grew up with my dad starting his business, and the only source of income was from my mom, and it was very tense and stressful, long enough for me to remember that, you know what, I am not going to do it myself. And then years and years later, I had a big change of heart and mind, and I really stumbled upon this idea that I really wanted to try out. And I finished my MBA at Kellogg in 2009. Not a great job market anyway, and I did get bit by the entrepreneurial bug. And so I thought, well, now is as good as ever to try it out. So I started the Leadership Story Lab in 2010. Out of this really a hypothesis at the time that in a competitive environment, such as all entrepreneur, the one that we all lived in, that although qualification and credentials, those are important, but it will only get you as far as 1 foot in the door. To get yourself in the door, you have to be able to demonstrate the fit, and that was something that I used to tell these MBA applicants who used to apply to the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business, where I was an admission officer at the time, that, you know, your GMAT is great, your GPA is it's unbelievably high, competitive major and all of that, but you didn't demonstrate the fit. And so I began to wonder myself, and luckily at that time, nobody asked me, what does that mean? What does fit mean? And how do you demonstrate that? And so later on when I, after I left the job and I had a bit of time and distance, then I realized that yes, although these applicants all had great credentials, but all they did when they had the opportunity to interact with us through the essays and interviews was regurgitating facts, such as things that we already could have gleaned from their resume. And I saw that a lot of entrepreneurs more or less did similar things. You know, they focus on the products, they focus on the features, and the same thing with service, but they don't really think about the overall story of how would this product or service benefit me, the customers, the clients, and the same thing with investors too. Why should I believe in you and take a risk on you, and if you haven't already launched several wildly successful companies, why should I do that? And as admissions officers, we were asking the same thing too. We had so many highly qualified applicants to choose from. Why should we take a chance on you? And so those who just stick with the facts tend to get denied it, and those who tell stories, compelling stories, they tend to be more successful.
Yeah, you know, it's because you can just envision that kind of well-known picture of, you know, all the fish that look one way and then another fish looks another and he's swimming in the other direction, because you kind of blend in. So when you can stand out, and there's a lot of ways to do that, of course, but the thing that I want to touch on here is you mentioned the admissions, and I think that we could use that same example in business for someone trying to get funding and they're going to go pitch, or someone trying to get, even a bank loan, or even someone pitching a board of directors on their concept, whatever that business concept may be. There's the traditional way of doing things. You think of, the bank loan package, fill in this and fill in that and give us a cover letter. So what are some tips? Because when I hear story, I think once upon a time. But what are some tips on, in the business world, in some tangible, practical, opportunities like what I just mentioned there? What are some tips on bringing a story to life, and what would that sound like?
Sure. Stories, as most of us experience it for the first time, they do tend to begin with once upon a time. That certainly is a valid way to start, but we shouldn't confine ourselves to one phrase. Instead, I like to think of telling stories as a structural approach to deploying stories. One way to look at it is when you begin a letter, whether it's a loan cover letter for a loan applications or cover letter for a job. The beginning of it, most people tend to do a soft launch, the sort of clearing the throat, if you will, the very conventional, predictable way. But if you think about a good story and how a good story would start, it starts with a scene, a setting, a time, but it always ends with a hook. Mm-hmm. So we can borrow that same principle and apply it in a business setting. So one of the ways that one of the things that I always advise my clients to do is don't bother with your name, don't bother with your title or your organization. Start with a picture. Start with a customer. When she walked into your store, what would she see? What would
almost
she
like
hear?
A living case study.
Almost like a living case studies, but you end with a hook. You don't begin and end with that story, but you pause where there's a question, there's a conflict, there's a contradiction, right? Then you can go in and you can back off, and then you can introduce yourself and who you are, why, where in this picture do you fit in, right? Then you can blend in with the facts, blend in with the features that you do need to talk about, but don't start with it, because that is not going to catch people's attention. It's not going to inspire them to imagine, and most likely they're not going to keep paying attention.
Yeah, that's a really good example, because I think a lot of people can use an example, a case study kind of a thing, like, oh, hey, one time I had this client who, and I think even when you start even in that approach, people start going, ooh, interesting, people love hearing stories, and like the old saying goes, facts tell, but stories sell. So do you find, like the example you just gave where you lead off with that, and then you can go, hi, my name is, and I help, just like we learned in this example, we're able to achieve whatever. But do you find that you can use stories literally to sell, or are you saying that it puts your brand or in your business in the best frame of mind so that when you do your quote-unquote pitch, that it's more well-received?
So we can think about, given the context and especially the time constraint, because if you were asked to do a pitch, then most likely it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or however long that may be. That does in many ways constrained whether you can tell what I call the classical story. But even if you cannot tell a classical story with a beginning, middle, and an end, what I would encourage my clients to do is then extrapolate key elements in stories, in effective stories, and apply it in your pitch, apply it in your argument, or apply it in your presentation, whatever the context might be. Now, to your earlier question, can you still tell a full story? Sure, of course you can. I always I'm a big advocate for oftentimes the best time to tell stories is not when you're explicitly asked, hey, Mike, tell me about a story yesterday when you watched the eclipse with your colleagues and friends. The best time to tell that is when I am least expected. And so blend in your opportunity with the goal that you had in mind at the end of the day, because we need facts to place the speakers in our mind and categorize them, but we also need stories to inspire our imagination.
Now, in business storytelling, because that's what we're talking about, is to succeed in business, let's make ourselves stand out and our competitive advantage shine. Where does the personal side come in? It's not, you're not going to tell 14 stories of when you went fishing as a kid, but is there an element of infusing a little bit of your personal, life into your business storytelling so that it kind of balances out and they can see you as a real human being, not just someone, putting a pen and a contract in front of them?
Of course, that's hugely important. And so long as the line is clear that we're not holding hands and singing Kumbaya. There's nothing wrong with it. But in the business context where the personal elements comes in is to answer the ultimate question, can we trust you? And then if that answer is yes, and then the second one would be, do we like you? Can we imagine working with you, or would I have to think twice every time I try to reach out to you and ask questions because I just don't like the interactions? But the trust thing is hugely important because going back to the emissions example, certainly everybody knows that they need to put their best foot forward. Everybody's presenting themselves in the best of light. But we always know that what looks good on paper or even sometimes in person, once you invite them into your organizations or into your investment portfolio or whatever it is that you open your own door and let them in, then things can look a little different, right? But in the screening, in the evaluating process, you can't invite everyone in and start a tryout. So the personal elements in the business setting is when you tell the stories that really illustrate your central character, and that even without actually having that interaction with you and through that story, I felt like, I get what you're about. I understand it. And then I can relate to it. And if I can relate to it, then I like it. I like you. And therefore, I want to do business with you.
And sometimes you're mentally going through those steps, maybe even subconsciously in the sense that someone else in that one of your competitors had talked to them or pitched them, and just something didn't feel right, resonate, and you just stood out and you became more warm and personable and things like that. And so many times, I've even heard people say, we spent literally 5 minutes talking about our product and what we can do, but all the other time was talking about, whatever, and it was just developing that connection. And so I think that's a big piece that people don't realize. They feel like they just want to barrage them with all the bullet points of benefits and features and what it can do, and in reality, the person just wants to, I literally had a client yesterday tell me that they were talking to a large governmental organization about this big problem they had, this literally a pile of, hazardous waste, and the government agency said, can you handle this? And the answer was yes. And they're like, help, just go. But that was after rapport was built and after examples. And so what do you find some misconceptions are of business storytelling? Because I think that some people can go, oh, I got it, and they jump off and start into, business storytelling, their version of, but what are some pitfalls that they might run into or misconceptions that they may have?
Well, I'm glad you asked this because first, the mindset is important. And in my book, I try to really focus on in the data story chapter especially, and that is we are trained to prove ourselves, to prove our works, to prove our solutions. That is correct, first of all, and probably the best solution out there. So if you can think back on time in schools when you're solving a math problems, even if you get to the right answer, if you don't show your step, if you don't prove how you get to the right answer, you're only going to get partial credit. Right? So we're brought up and trained quite well, so much so that we forget that that's the habit, that's a mindset that we default to, that I'm being evaluated, I must prove myself. So I go through the steps. I almost having writing an academic paper mindset, right? But in reality, in the business context, yes, we need to prove, but more so we need to persuade. And that's a whole different communication approach to proving your points that you're valid. Persuading people means you, first of all, make sure that your audience feel that you get them. You get what their struggles are, what their pain points are, and you know what they're trying to do. And not just in your mind that, yeah, I do understand them, I really do, but then your audience have to know that you know them, right? And that's something that people can't forget. And that's why all that rapport building and why, we didn't really talk that much about the product, but we talk about, quote unquote, everything else. Well, that everything else is building that that understanding of that. Oh yeah, I think you do get us. You do understand what we're trying to do beyond this contract, beyond this project, or beyond this product. And then yes, then you do want to prove. You need to prove that you have the right solutions. And you also want to inspire them. That's part of persuading, that there is a different version of the future that we can inspire you with towards with our product, with our service, with our working together, and that you want your audience, your clients, to aspire to your version of the future with you in it. And that's all good stories can bring us there.
Yeah, I love that example. And, you mentioned your book and some of the concepts in there. Let's wrap up with telling our listeners what's the best way that they can reach out to you to learn more about your business storytelling services, as well as pick up a copy of your book.
Great. The book is available at bookstores, independent or major bookstores. It's also available online. Again, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all the major online retailers. There is audio copy. There audio version or hardback versions, and you can also find out more about the book through our website, and that is leadershipstorylab, all in one word, .com, leadershipstorylab.com. And we are working very hard, actually, to on a story club guide where you and a few colleagues can get together, much like a book club, when they decide all read a book and then they get a guide for discussion. We're working on that guide for a story club. so that if a small group of you and your friends and colleagues want to really amp up your storytelling chops, go get the book and then come to our website. By the end of the month, we'll have the guide available, and so you can do it yourself with your friends and colleagues, or if you have any questions and let us know how we can help you, we'll be ready.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Esther. It was wonderful getting to know you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.